Pascal Marco.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you coming out tonight. I don't know if we'll need this, but my voice is a little hoarse due to a cold I've been fighting, so I apologize. I hope it doesn't distract any of you from this evening. So I just want to start out by saying thank you, Chicago Cubs. Yeah. I don't believe those words are coming from my lips, but they are. I was really fretting that the Cubs were going to go to 5 games, which would have been tonight.
The curse was broken on the ninth inning of that game.
Oh, amazing. So thankfully they won. Actually, it was the top of the ninth. They were losing 5-2. And I said to Karen, I said, do you believe it? I says, these friggin' Cubs, they're going to lose this game. They couldn't have won one game. I said, and then it went, why? She says, well, I said, it'll go to game 5. I says, and that's tomorrow night. So she says, don't worry about it. She says, that they might win it. And sure enough, they won it. That was an amazing comeback. So thank you Cubbies, and thank you Cub fans. Thank you all for coming out. I know it's difficult to come out on a weeknight. Kids, thankfully, are maybe in school, or are you on spring break? Spring break? You're in school. Okay. Well, Maddie, you get to stay up late tonight. And I do appreciate y'all coming out. When I was in Chicago, I talked a very little bit about the first book, Identity Lost, and then the second book, now Render Safe. You folks have been so patient who read Identity Lost. I see some of my reading divas here at the book club that had me out for the first book. You've been so supportive. It's been 5 long years for me. Seems like a long time. But the second book's out, and I hope you all get a chance to read it. Who has read Identity Lost? So we've got a handful of people. Good, I'm glad to see there's some non-Identity Lost readers here. We do have copies of that book tonight. And who so far has read Render Safe? 1, 2, couple people. Okay, that's great. Terrific. I do recommend that you read Identity Lost first. I think it will enrich the reading of Render Safe. It is a sequel. Some of the characters do return. It's a different story, though. It's definitely a little bit more complex. And the story took me in many different directions when I first started to write it. I had been thinking about the topic for a long time of how to do this, but my Maricopa County prosecutor, Stan Colby, my hero, he comes back in the second book. That's not a spoiler alert. I think everybody would know that. And then his returning sidekick, Chandler homicide detective Brian Handley, also returns with him. Not a surprise. So, but I had to give him something to do in this second book, and I wasn't really sure when to start it and how to frame it and what to do with it. If you remember, for those who've read Identity Lost, I took a murder that happened in Chicago back in the 70s and used that as the framework for the murder in my story. And I think that's what enriched it. A lot of people said to me, "Was that a true story?" Well, it kind of was. It was kind of based on a true story, but I changed the characters around, obviously, quite a bit. And out of that book, we added some new characters. And so we're going to do some trivia a little right at the end. I'm going to talk for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, do a little bit of trivia, just a couple of questions. I've got some giveaways for you, for all of you great fans. And then we'll take questions and answers, and then we'll sign books. So thank you again for coming out. So what's the second book about? Well, I wanted to bring back my heroes and have them fighting crime in Phoenix once again. They are fictional. They are not really true characters that work in the Maricopa County's Attorney's Office or that work in the Chandler Homicide Office. But I do get that question a lot. And I do get the question a lot, are you a cop? Or are you an attorney? No, I am neither. I'm just somebody with a very vivid imagination. And I did a lot of research. I did more research, I think, for this book because of the subject matter. And I think one of the things that, many things motivated me to write this book. But I think in living in Arizona the last 22 years, for those who know me, you know that I'm not a very political person. I don't get into arguments about politics or religion. I'm looking at my son-in-law over there. And it's something that I really kind of avoid. But one of the things that I did notice is that if you wanted to get anybody's involvement in talking about something, I mean, you could talk about religion or sports or whatever, but it seemed that in Arizona, when you brought up the immigration topic, that got people's hot buttons going. People who would rarely give their opinion on somebody, on those things, and I'm looking over at my wife, Karen, who is somebody, first of all, I've got to thank her for everything she's done with supporting me with writing this book, and yes, a big round of applause. Karen, give up. She, you know, I bounce everything off of her, and she tells me when stuff is good and when it's not good. I said to her, actually before coming here, I said, should I read something from the book tonight? She goes, no. And I said, well, okay. She goes, no, don't read anything from the book. She says, just tell your story. And I said, okay, fine. So I listened to her. She kind of knows when, she does know when things are right. But anyway, one of the things that I heard Karen mention or got involved with was a topic on immigration. And that was very rare. I mean, we don't discuss politics, we don't discuss religion. And so I thought, wow, if she could be interested in what's going on with the immigration topic, there's got to be everybody in this state, and certainly even in the country, would be involved with it. But what do I know about it? What can I talk about it? So I just decided to take my fictional characters and tell the story through that. When I was in Chicago, excuse me 1 minute, I might be doing this a lot tonight. What was great about going back to Chicago was being able to visit Lake Michigan. I write a lot about Lake Michigan and Identity Lost. I got a lot of nice compliments about describing the lake shore, and Chicagoans telling me, wow, you really captured it. And so I remember growing up to Lake Michigan, very close to Lake Michigan, and so when I went there just this couple weeks ago, it was raining and the lake was splashing over Lakeshore Drive, if you're familiar with it, down by the Museum of Science and Industry. And it's just a gorgeous city. But I realized my mom, who had just turned 95, she told me, by the way, she says, you know, they're metering our water now in Chicago. Well, Diane, she's in Chicago, she goes, she didn't know that, right? Well, that's just so shocking to have your water metered in Chicago, because water was always free. I mean, people sprinkled their lawns in thunderstorms. I mean, it's just, you never worried about water. And when I came to Arizona, 1994, 22 years ago now, Karen had preceded me. She was at the closing of the house. I was back in Munster, Indiana at that time. They had sent me all the documents for the closing, and we were doing a con call. It was pre-internet. And, you know, I rely upon Karen to define the house and make it right and do that. And she likes me to go through all the documents and all the fine print. And so one of the documents I was looking at, it said, they asked me on the phone, they said, Mr. Marco, do you have any questions about the closing papers? And I go, yeah, I do have a question. I says, what's this document about a 100-year water supply guarantee? And they go, oh, well, we assure that every homeowner in Arizona will have a 100-year water supply guarantee. And I said, I had never heard of that before. I thought, where are they going to guarantee having water in the desert? I mean, I never heard of such a ludicrous thing. And that always stuck with me, because I said, I know that by living next to Lake Michigan for all those years and thinking that water was endless, we know now about the water issues in our country, in our state particularly. So a 100-year water supply guarantee. So that, again, stuck with me. And the immigration issue has been a factor in my writing. But I think the biggest thing that I've been concerned about as a writer, just as a person living here, is the sustainability of Phoenix. And, you know, we live in the desert. Do we have enough water? What if things were to happen? Would we be able to survive? And I started thinking about those things, and I started reading a lot about it. And I'm going to read for you a little bit about this writer. His name is William DeBise. And this article kind of germinated what I was thinking about when I wrote the book, and how Stan and Brian might come across a situation that would bring this whole topic about. And this is an article that came out back in 2013 by William DeBise, who writes about sustainability of Phoenix. And I'm just going to read a few chapters of this, and then we're going to discuss this a little bit if you like. So he says, if cities were stocks, you'd want to short Phoenix. Of course, it's an easy city to pick on. The nation's 13th largest metropolitan area crams 4.3 million people into a low bowl in a hot desert where horrific heat waves and windstorms visit regularly. It snuggles next to the nation's largest nuclear plant, and having exhausted all local resources, it depends on an improbable infrastructure to suck water from the distant and dwindling Colorado River. In Phoenix, you don't ask what could go wrong, you ask what couldn't. So when I read that, I said, wow, I mean, I'm living here in Phoenix. What would I ever do if the power were to go out, or if we weren't to have water supplied? And it really struck me. So DeBise goes on to say that, and that's the point really, Phoenix's multiple vulnerabilities, which are plenty daunting taken one by one, have the capacity to magnify one another, like compounding illnesses. In this regard, it's a quintessentially modern city, a pyramid of complexities requiring large energy inputs to keep the whole apparatus humming. The urban disasters of our time, New Orleans hit by Katrina, New York City swamped by Sandy, may arise from single storms, but the damage they do is the result of a chain reaction of failures. Grids going down, levees failing, backup systems not backing up. As you might expect, academics have come up with a name for such a breakdown: infrastructure failure interdependencies. Now, you wouldn't want to use it in a poem, but it does catch an emerging theme of our time. Phoenix's pyramids of complexities look shakier than most because it stands squarely in the crosshairs of climate change. The area, like most of the rest of the Southwest, is already hot and dry, and it's getting even hotter and drier, and is increasingly battered by powerful storms. Sandy and Katrina previewed how coastal cities can expect to fare as seas rise and storm strengthens. Phoenix pulls back the curtain on the future of inland empires. If you want a taste of the brutal new climate to come, the place to look is where the climate is already harsh and growing more so, the aptly named Valley of the Sun. So that kind of hit me pretty hard. And I started thinking more and more about it, and I said, what would happen if we lost our water, we lost our power? I'm a businessman in the community, and I was a member of the Tempe Chamber of Commerce, and one of the members of the chamber was a gal by the name of Mary Palomino, and she worked for SRP. So one day I just asked Mary, I said, hey Mary, could we have a cup of coffee one day, and I want to ask you a few questions. She said, sure. So I started asking her about how we get power into the valley. And boy, she painted me an interesting picture about how there is so many businesses coming into the valley that are just drawing huge amounts of power. And many of them are nondescript, in buildings that we don't even know what's inside them, a lot of them in the Salt River corridor. A lot of these companies are coming from out of state because there was the downturn in the economy and real estate was very cheap. So they started filling these buildings up with server farms, holding huge amounts of what they call big data. So you may have heard some of these terms. And so they're just sucking all this amounts of power. And I said, well, do we have enough power to give them? She said, oh yeah, we got plenty of power. She said, the one thing we are concerned about though is that in the summer, when Phoenix needs most of its power, it really has to rely upon the Navajo generating plant, the coal plant up on the Navajo Indian Reservation, about 300 or 400 miles away. And that's where we get most of our power in the summer. About 70 or 80% is coal-fired power. And so I said, well, how do you, aren't you worried about protecting that? She goes, well, there's really nothing we can do to protect the transmission lines. SRP has now taken all of the locations of their power substations off of the internet. They used to 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, you could go online and find out where all these substations are. They don't even have names on them anymore. You'll see them in Tempe and other places. And she said, we're really concerned about, what would happen if somebody struck the transmission lines. I said, well, what would happen? She goes, well, it's not a pretty picture. So that started really how I started getting involved in the germination for the idea of render safe. That's just really the tip of the iceberg. I have to point out, there's a few people in the audience who've been very supportive as well, is Mary from SRP. Sean, my son-in-law, who's an EOD technician, trained. He kind of was the first person I started talking about, military exploits and bombs, and what if bombs were lost in Phoenix, and what would happen if somebody were to get in the wrong hands. He then put me in tune with Dan Walton from the ATF. Dan was terrific in helping me kind of bring the core of the story together. I think when I presented it to him, he was saying, "Yeah, man, that's really, yeah, that could be really bad." So, and then lastly, Anthony May, who you may have seen Anthony on CNN as a spokesperson. Whenever there's a terrorist attack, he comes on for CNN and waxes on about the issues of why we should be worried with people who have explosives in metropolitan areas. And Anthony gave me a great blurb for the book, and I appreciate that. But that was really the kind of the start for this. And then there were a couple other incidences that happened in Arizona over the last 22 years that also kind of made the story gel together. The first one was an incident that happened back in 1997 where an A-10 fighter pilot went off course unexpectedly. He was on his last training mission before he became a captain in the United States Air Force, flying A-10 Warthogs out of Davis-Monthan, and he went off formation, peeled off formation unexpectedly, flew about 800 or 900 or almost 1,000 miles all over the state of Arizona and into southeastern Colorado, and then mysteriously augured his plane into the wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. The Air Force has never given a official explanation of what he did. There was a lot of speculation that he committed suicide. There was no suicide note, however. For those of you who believe, people who commit suicide usually leave a message behind. They usually don't commit suicide and not leave a message, because part of committing suicide is to give that last message of pain, of reaching out. There was also some rumors going on that he might have been spurned in a homosexual affair. That was proven to be not true. But anyway, this pilot flew all over. They finally found the plane. They recovered all of the munitions from that plane, except the 4 Mark 82 500-pound bombs that were live on the plane. They were never found. And they still haven't been found to this day. And so there was a lot of speculation. Did he stop somewhere? Did he drop the bombs off? Did they get into the wrong hands? Did he sell them? It was the first incident where an American fighter pilot or jet had been lost in the United States on friendly territory. It hasn't happened before or since. So that kind of made me wonder. Those cases where people do things and there's no explanation for them always make me get a little crazy, I guess. Wondering why they do those things, because I wonder myself why I do some of the things I do, and there's sometimes no explanation for it. So, and the last thing that was another case that happened in Arizona that's extremely intriguing is the case of Robert Fischer. And many of you probably know that case, but if you don't, it's in its simplistic form. Robert Fischer allegedly killed his wife and 3 children in South Scottsdale back in 2001, April of 2001, and then allegedly set the house on fire. It exploded, and 10 days later they found his truck on the edge of the Mogollon Rim with his dog tied to the truck, and he was nowhere to be found. He still hasn't been found. There's been articles recently, it's been 15 years, there's been articles recently that they believe he's alive, living somewhere, probably right under our noses like Whitey Bulger did in Santa Monica. It's just been a really, really mysterious case of what's happened, what happened and all that. And I think if I'm not mistaken, they just released, I don't have any spoilers here, I won't go there with that. There's some new news that has come out about that case that I kind of somehow figured it out in my head what it might be. But what always made me wonder about that, when I discussed that idea with Karen about this case, we always wondered, well, what would make him do it? If he did do it, what would make Robert Fischer kill his wife and children, and then just disappear. And so when I started thinking about all the ideas of what could possibly have motivated him, and then thinking that, well, my fictional characters, if they were working in Maricopa County at the time, well, then they would have pulled that case. They probably would have pulled that case, and so I decided to push them into that case vis-a-vis using it as the framework for one of the, for part of what the book is all about. So that's really what kind of Render Safe is all about. It's a different book than Identity Lost. Identity Lost, I think, was more of an emotional story because there was a little boy involved, losing his identity. There was some heavy witness protection stuff in the book. There was a lot of fun baseball banter because of one of the characters. I did keep that baseball banter in this book, in case you're wondering. So I've had some Sox fans come up to me and go, "Yeah," and some Cub fans going, "Man, what are you doing that for?" So, but I'm having fun with it, and that's what the two books about. Getting back to the water issue, I want to read one more thing to you, and this kind of ties in with some of the content of some of the topics of the book in terms of the villain in the book and what's kind of motivating him. And let me just read a little bit to you here about that. So, a sudden catastrophe, DeBise writes here, like an earthquake, a hurricane, or tornado, can dissolve social divisions. So when we have social divisions, it seems to bring a community together for a cause. Somebody's getting flooded out of their house, we come together, let's help them. There's a tornado, unexpected, let's help them. That brings out the best in our citizenry. But drought and heat waves are different. You don't know that they have taken hold until you're already in them. And you never know when they will end. The unpleasantness eats away at you. It corrodes your state of mind. You have lots of time to meditate on the deficiencies of your neighbors, which loom larger the longer the crisis goes on. So that really made me think about, I've often said to my son Dominic, boy, we talk about the divisiveness now in our country with what we're seeing in the election. If we ever needed to come together for something like that, I think it might be, sadly, neighbor fighting neighbor, and who can I crawl over to get out of here rather than helping people. And it's kind of a sad thing to think about, but there are people out there like that, but there's also, our heroes who can fight against that. So lastly, I'll say here, I'll finish up with what DeBise says here. It is a truism that communities that do not pull together fail to surmount their challenges. Phoenixes are as daunting as any faced by an American city in the new age of climate change, but it's winner-take-all politics, out of which has come Arizona's flagrantly repressive anti-immigration law, that's SB 1070 he's referring to, combined with the fragmentation of the metro area into nearly 24 competing jurisdictions. We've got Scottsdale, Glendale, Phoenix, Mesa, all these different. Della, you've worked with that with your work with DEMA about bringing just the ability of first responders to communicate together. What a challenge that's been in the Valley of the Sun. Combined with the fragmentation into these jurisdictions, essentially guarantee that when the worst of times hit, common action and shared sacrifice will remain as insubstantial as a desert mirage. When one day the U-Haul vans all point away from town and the people of the Valley of the Sun clog the interstates heading for greener, wetter pastures, more than the brutal heat of a new climate paradigm will be driving them away. The breakdown of cooperation and connectedness will spur them along too. So that's kind of where that was motivating me when I wrote this story. Stan and Brian are back fighting crime. They're going to hopefully get their man or get their person. And hopefully when you read the book, you'll all be as intrigued about the situation as I am. So thank you very much.